Welcome to Halal Money Matters, presented by Saturn Capital. I'm Monem Salam. And one of the most common questions I get when I go to mosques or even conferences is Muslims that are working for companies. They ask me, my 401k lineup doesn't have a single Islamic option. So what can I actually do about it? So what I decided to do was actually have a two-part series interviewing what others have done in this situation. One took the route of engagement with senior management, and the other one actually ended up filing a lawsuit. So today what we're going to do is the first part. I'm joined by Malek Sarhan, who's a Palestinian-American engineer. We started his career at General Motors right in the middle of COVID and quickly realized that none of the 27 funds in his 401k were truly Sharia-compliant. Instead of just opting out and leaving that 4% match on the table, what Malek decided to do through GM's MENA employee resource group, which is Middle East, North Africa, and with the help of a senior executive, and they helped make the case for adding access to halal funds to the plan's brokerage window. What we're going to do is talk to him exactly about what he did, what worked inside this huge organization like GM, and maybe with that, you'll find some insights and nuggets to be able to follow a similar path at your own company, inshallah. Let's get started. Assalamu alaikum, Malek. Thank you for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, look, this is one of those shows that I've wanted to do for a long time. There's a lot of people who come up to me and in our team and are like, I want to. I'm working for a company. I have a 401k. There are no real Islamic options for me. What do I do? How do I get them to be able to do that? And we were having a conversation 2 weeks ago, and you mentioned that when you were at General Motors, you actually helped them to get that option available. And I was like, I got to get you on the show right away. I was like, Malek, we got to set up a time right now. So really glad you could join us. And I think you have a disclaimer you wanted to make as well. So.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I'm more than happy to share kind of the experiences that I went through to bring on the Sharia compliant option for the retirement. But the disclaimer I wanted to say is essentially that I'm going to kind of share the experiences I had as an employee, kind of going through the motions. I don't represent General Motors as an entity at all. So I'm more than happy to kind of share the process and everything that we went through for that, but I don't represent the company. So it's just
and I think, no, that's a really good point, because I think a lot of this stuff we'll talk about can be applied everywhere else also. So I hope people can benefit from it. But I wanted to start off and maybe just get a background from you, right? Where you come from, as far as, what city and stuff like that, how you got to GM, and then what are you doing now?
Yeah, so essentially I'm Palestinian American. My parents moved from Palestine in the 80s to the Chicago area. So I grew up there in the Bridgeview community, which is a very Palestinian American community. I was put through Islamic school, pretty much middle school and high school. So from a very young age, my parents had always kind of instilled like this Islamic values at the core of everything. So after I graduated from Universal, I went to Illinois Tech, which is an engineering school in the south side of Chicago, majored in mechanical engineering, and then got really interested in the automotive industry. So I worked at a couple car companies. I spent some time at Toyota and then Rivian, and then finally I was at GM for about 4 years.
Out of curiosity, are you a lover of cars and that's why you got into it?
I'm actually not much of a gearhead. I like cars, but I was more obsessed with the scale of the automotive industry. I did an internship at Toyota where I was in their manufacturing plant for their Corolla model, and the Corolla is like one of the highest volume products in the world. So just to see we'd implement a change on the product, and then we'd see 100, 300, 400 vehicles kind of rolling off the line every day. To me, that was like fantastic. And you could point to something on the road and say you did that. So yeah, it was something I derived a lot of fulfillment from. Ended up working at General Motors in Detroit. So right after college, I moved to Detroit, and I lived there for about 4.5 years. In various roles, mostly in like electric vehicle development, so things like charging and batteries. But in Michigan, I got a really nice flavor of the Muslim community. Things like Miftah Institute, my local mosques, just kind of complementing the work life with the Islamic kind of foundation, alhamdulillah. And then I actually left General Motors about a year and a half ago to right now I'm pursuing my MBA at Harvard Business School. So I'm not at the company anymore. But still very connected with the folks that are there, and
that's
very
great.
Invested in the company's mission.
Good luck on that MBA. And so let's get started. So we're talking about the 401k, and let's kind of set the scene, right? You come into GM, and what happens? Like on your first days, what's the first day that you discovered what was going on, or did it take you some time to come to that realization? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, I remember my first day at GM. It was like July of 2020. So it was like this was COVID time. So I had orientation remotely, and so I remember it was like a 3 day thing where like one day was essentially focused on benefits. Like one day was focused on like where do you get your badge and where do you like check in, where do you go, and the second day was just all benefits. So we talked extensively about like health benefits and we talked a lot about retirement at length. And so what happened was like we were essentially showed as employees, and I came in through like this entry level engineering program. So I was in this orientation with about 200 other people, most of which were non-Muslim. There were a couple Muslims, and we slowly found each other. But when they went through this benefits presentation, they essentially outlined that like our brokerage partner was Fidelity, and that these were the options that we could have for opting in for 401k options within Fidelity. So like, went through things like our 401k, the Roth options, pre-tax, post-tax, and it was a lot to kind of digest in one day. But the one thing that was like principle on the top of my mind, this is, remember, like a new grad out of college, like I was 21. I'd never really thought much about a 401k. So it's kind of like a familiar experience for a lot of folks that are like entered their first job in the corporate environment. And the first thing that I was saying was like, okay, well, I just want to make sure that whatever I end up opting into is halal because, my salary is something that I tried to choose a company that I thought was, not engaging in, income that would be like impermissible for myself and my values as a Muslim. But when it came to stocks and it came to retirement options, there was this big kind of gray area. And I think a lot of people have that kind of anxiety. I certainly did. So, yeah, they essentially presented a list of options of things that we could essentially, the way that it worked was you would opt into investing your retirement portfolio into certain funds. So there was like, you could put in 4% or at least 4% or north of that of your income into your retirement options, and then they would do a 4% matching. And then from there, it was just, you get to choose where you go.
So let me stop you. So
Yeah.
that was the first time you had exposure to it. I did a previous podcast where we talked about, what do you do on your first day when you come to work and that type of thing. But did you ever have it, and did you ever think about it from a perspective of before you actually took the job, you would like look into the benefits and see whether something like your 401k was a lot? Because that is something that I've talked to people about as well. Is before you have to accept, even if they don't have it, at least it raises an awareness that hey, there are people out there that are looking for halal options, and they might or might not take a job based on whether or not the 401k options are there. So was that something on your mind whenever you were initially applying?
It's a great question. And honestly, I would say that like, it was a part of the it was a part of the calculus of like where I wanted to work after school,
Yeah.
just, making sure there was some halal income. But to be candid with you, I mean, it was COVID time. This was like March of 2020. And so for me, it was more so like I was really happy that I had a job offer.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of people were getting offers rescinded. And so for me, I was like, okay, I'm not working in like some defense capacity or something that I'm not comfortable with. This is a car manufacturer. I know that there are a decent amount of Muslims that work there. I'm sure I can figure it out. I don't know all the details. I didn't know at that time, of course, I didn't know about the lack of retirement options, but I said, this is something that potentially I can deal with there. And now I had to kind of face the challenge of dealing with that when I got there, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Cool. So then on day one, did you actually raise an objection, or did that come later on?
Well, the first thing I did was I wasn't sure what would count as Sharia compliant and what wouldn't. Like I saw like, for example, they had like the S&P 500 and they had like a social index. And so the first thing I did was I just kind of went online and tried to look up your standard resources of like what would be considered Sharia compliant. Like what would be Sharia compliant if you don't have like a fully Sharia compliant option? What's your next best option? And so from that, I won't go into the details of the research, but like from the research, what I gathered was there was not a single purely Sharia compliant option. There wasn't a single one out of 27. I remember it was 27 options. Not one was a good option. It was all like, well, in this case, maybe the S&P, maybe the social index, because that's kind of close, but nothing was truly there. So that's when I think it was like second week of work. I had ended up reaching out to the HR person. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that's a really good point because a lot of times there will be like a social fund or environmental fund and that type of thing. And I tell people it's like that's great for all the like even if it's an ethical fund, it will avoid the alcohol and the tobacco, but it won't do is avoid the banks, and that's a fairly large part of both of well the S&P, but then also on the ESG or the ethical fund side of it. So yeah, it might be maybe another option, but it's definitely not the option for us, right? So.
Yeah, it was like a 50% solution, if you want to call it that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, that was exactly that was the point. Was a lot of the financial institutions within those funds were not compliant. So I raised the alarm. I think it was like my second week of work, and this is something takes a little bit of guts. I mean, you just started this job and you're very happy to have the job because of the economic environment. And so, but alhamdulillah, I think it was an environment where I felt kind of comfortable to just ask for, just to at least explore. Maybe there was something that I wasn't aware of. So I had reached out to the individual that hosted our benefits training on the second day of orientation. And I had said, I wanted to clarify, I see the 27 options. I happen to be Muslim and I have some strict requirements on what I can invest in terms of my 401k. Is there an option to like self-select a fund, or is there an option to go beyond the 27, for example? And the answer was like a pretty firm no, that the 27 was seen collectively as a very well-rounded, reputable kind of like high return, proven portfolio that like the finance team and the benefits team had kind of curated for their employees. And the answer I got was that like, GM is a company of over 60,000 employees. It's a huge global entity, and it would be really difficult to, accommodate like every individual who wanted to bring on a fund. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. So that was kind of, for me, it was like, okay, this is just not happening. I'd spoken to some of my colleagues that were Muslim at the company, what they were doing. The majority of them, a lot of them actually opted not to even invest in their own 401ks. They essentially missed out on the employee matching, which I thought was a huge loss because that's free money. This is the first thing you should be doing if you're single and you're young and you're coming out of school, safety net, 401k. Like that's
true.
Absolutely
And
great to start.
that's a really good point. What I did want to mention is just so we can lay the background, the kind of the people who decide, what are going to be the elections in the actual 401k as far as funds are concerned, and they're made up of employees of GM, right?
Yes.
And they use a consultant sometimes, and I don't know what General Motors uses, but they do use a consultant sometimes to be able to help them craft it. But it is something that they're trying their best to be able to do, and they work with HR to be able to do that. And it's really important to kind of mention that it's probably would be fairly easy for you to be able to contact these people because they are doing it as kind of like a volunteer thing for the company, for the benefit of all the employees. So that's one thing. The second thing I was going to mention is you're absolutely right. I do come across many people, and may Allah reward them for doing it. They actually don't invest any of their money in the 401k because they don't have any Islamic options, and then they lose out on the 4% match, the growth every year, those type of things. That's become an issue as well. So anyway, I just want to highlight that you had mentioned it because I see that across different companies also.
No, that's a great point. And honestly, yeah, I respect that opinion. I think it's like if there's any gray, they kind of want to shy away. I think like what's important, and from the scholars that I talked to that were in Michigan at the time, they were saying like it's important from a religious standpoint that we establish like what is the line, what is permissible, what isn't permissible, so that like if you're at the situation where you don't have a perfect option, but these are the options, what exactly is kind of like the ruling. And so in that instance, I felt comfortable taking, kind of like a shortcut, or not a shortcut, but like a 50% solution. But to your original point about the decision makers, once we get into the story of how this ended up working out, that was a crucial point. And I don't have full transparency on every single lever of the decision-making process, but I do know that the ultimate decision makers rested within the internal organization. They rested within GM. They did have an external partner for the brokerage. Of course, it was Fidelity. That was their choice. But like it was a difficult decision for the people that had to decide because they're balancing the relationship with Fidelity, the investment portfolio folks, and then of course the employees.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
so let's not jump ahead, but this is going to be an important point later on. So now, okay, your second week, you start raising a little bit you talk to other Muslim employees, they're not investing at all. What's step number 2?
Yeah, so just from the understanding from my coworkers and colleagues and friends that like they weren't investing in the 401k, it definitely starts to kind of create an environment of discontentment where you're like, wow, like this is something that I feel like it's a job benefit. It's something that I'm owed as an employee. To get 4% matching is fairly good. And I started to kind of feel a little bit disappointed, really, truly, that this wasn't an option that we had. So again, in terms of like how I had raised the alarm, at this point I'd only done one thing. I had reached out to HR, the people that I had gotten the orientation from. At this point, so I'd say like in the first month or 2 months of work, when I had realized that this wasn't going to be an easy problem to fix, another kind of element that came into this was, these large organizations will have some like employee affiliation groups, like MENA, like a veterans affiliation group. And so these are like kind of all under the umbrella of DE&I. But MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa, was a de facto group that a lot of the Muslims kind of got the representation through, because actually none of these affiliation groups were allowed to be religious. So at least that was just general motor policy. So there were no religious affiliation groups. We didn't have like a Muslim network at GM.
So that's something that I think that is company specific, because I do know of companies that do allow that they're called like Muslim Employee Resource Group, or they have different names from different corporation. But I guess from I didn't realize this. I thought all of them had it, but I guess some of them have only like secular organizations, and some companies allow religious ones as well. So if you're joining new or kind of getting up there, like kind of figure out like what is it that your company does allow. I guess that's a kind of
no, great point. Yeah, so they didn't have any, whether it was because of a lack of the rules or because there just hadn't been any. From my understanding, it was that the affiliation groups had to be, they didn't have to, they could not be affiliated with religion. They had to be like apolitical and a-religious, I think were the two requirements. So a lot of the like Muslim kind of concerns bubbled up through the MENA kind of, we call it an ERG, an employee resource group.
And was this like through group chats and stuff like that? Is that how you were kind of?
It's actually, so it is organized. So like these employee resource groups are actually like, they're kind of like entities within the company. So they'll have like someone who kind of oversees them, like an executive that's like a sponsor. They'll have like a whole board that's responsible, that has a budget from the DE&I office usually. And a lot of these actually got slashed, with the recent administration change because of the changing attitudes on DE&I. But, they're organized entities within the company that just, they kind of work to create a better environment for the folks that affiliate with those groups. And so a lot of the Muslims happened to join the MENA group. So when it came to like advocating for halal food on campus and like having a prayer space, a lot of those kind of represented themselves to leadership through the MENA ERG. Yeah. So I had engaged them and I had said, you guys, are we doing anything about this? And the response from MENA was essentially, it's something that we've tried doing in the past, but there wasn't anyone that was actively kind of like owning that within the employee network. And so also kind of a dead end at that point.
So at what point are you now? Are you like a month or two into it and into GM now, or
When I started reaching out, it was like 2 or 3 within the company. It was very early.
Sure.
But the idea didn't have legs or any traction until much later, unfortunately. Sure. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, okay, so let's keep going. You talk to the fellow Muslims, and they're like, yeah, we tried this before. And I've heard that a lot also. There are multiple iterations of people coming through and being able to do it. So nothing really happened. And then, so were you kind of like discouraged by that, or kind of more encouraged to say, I'm going to get it done?
Yeah. I was pretty discouraged, I'll be honest with you. I was like, okay, well, you're like one employee and you're kind of up against this kind of big behemoth of an organization. And, like, there's always whispers of like, new hires that come in and they kind of get reinvigorated and they're energized to kind of push this, because every time we had a new wave of hires, every July we would get a new wave of the recent grads from, at least in the engineering organization. And we'd get a couple Muslims that would come with every wave, and they'd ask, okay, they'd look around and say, what are you guys doing for your 401ks? And I'll kind of like sit them down and we'll have like this kind of like therapy discussion. I'll say, oh brother, like let me explain to you what's been going on. This is what I did. This is unfortunately like what we're doing. So you have 2 options. You can either opt out or you can do this and accept that it's not a perfect solution, whatever your comfort level is. And that was kind of the cycle. And, it is something that was obviously like complementary or tangential to my actual job role. So of course work got busy. I had to travel to some factories.
Yeah.
So it was naturally something that just was on the back burner, unfortunately, when you're not able to focus on it.
Was there ever like a attempt to be able to like tell HR or benefits committee like, hey, there's people losing out on that benefit because of that? Was there some kind of discussion on that?
Yeah, occasionally there would be. So like we would have, in the first 2 years I was at GM, it was like I said, an entry level kind of engineering program where we would rotate. And the good thing is we would have kind of like constant check-ins with HR. And they would ask like how, what's kind of the lay of the land? How are people doing? And I actually I was president of the entry level engineering program. It was called Track. It was like a rotation program. I was president of that organization the second year that I was in it. And it's like a 1-year stint. And so I got a lot of interfacing with HR because I would meet with them weekly. And so this was something that would come up because I had to represent a lot of these employees more than just myself, but the interests of the Muslim employees that were kind of concerned about not having an option, this would kind of bubble up every now and then. So sometimes we'd have in these check-ins, I'd say, there's still this big concern about the 401ks and the lack of an option for people that are Muslim. And the responses that I would generally get would be, we hear you. We want to validate that this is a concern for your community. And we want you to know that it's something that, if we could kind of change immediately, we would, or we would like to opt into it. But there's a lot of different stakeholders and there's a lot of moving pieces. And that's not something that's really low lift. It's something that you need a lot of buy-in from the organization to do. And it's something that's just not on the roadmap right now, which is like a nice way of saying, sorry, not going to happen right now. And so again, it was disconcerting, but I was fairly content. Like I must say, overall, I would say like the concerns in other aspects of the company were met pretty receptively, which is why I was even more surprised that like this was kind of an issue that would persist. Because in other elements, like when it came to accommodations, like for Ramadan and for prayers while we're traveling, like it was excellent, like excellent kind of work environment. I would say, at least from my perspective. It helps that you're in Southeast Michigan, which is like the second largest community of Muslims in the US. But
that's true.
Yeah, that's kind of so like I would say like that the timeline was like from when I had joined in July of 2020 until probably year 3 was kind of the status quo, where it was like occasionally I'd ask, nothing would really happen, and would just kind of roll with that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then what was the spark that started everything kind of rolling?
Yeah, the spark was, so this employee resource group, this MENA group, had like every year there was like new kind of elections, and there was like a new individuals that were kind of going to represent the organization. And I want to say it was like January of 2023 was when this kind of new batch of individuals had kind of come into the fold, and I had also kind of joined to lead like community events. And when that happened, there was this reshuffling of resources within General Motors, and a lot of these employee resources groups were actually kind of emboldened. They got more resources, and they were actually given more of a front line in terms of like marketing. They were represented a lot on like public facing marketing material, because GM kind of saw that as like a positive thing. At least my perspective is GM saw this as a positive thing to like, market to potential customers that like, oh, we have, the people behind your Corvette are these, Muslim and Arabs, or like the, we have a lot of vets that are behind your Chevy Tahoe. So it was a marketing tactic, but also it was just great for employees. So I want to say like early 2023, we not only got like a new team of individuals that were super kind of passionate about pushing the mission of making MENA, employees feel welcomed and home at GM, but we also got a new executive champion. And each one of these employee resource groups got an executive champion. What it is essentially, you have one employee at the company who's at least I think it's at least vice president, like vice president or higher. So someone who has some significant kind of decision-making capacity at the company.
Like a seniority level and stuff like that. It might be different at different companies, but it's somebody who's like overseeing it from the executive level.
Right.
I got it.
And they have significant kind of people responsibility, and they have some vested interest in the community that they're overseeing, and they would kind of oversee that community. We got a new executive champion who was, I won't list his name, but like he was the head of global Cadillac. So this guy was pretty up there, like just the head of a global brand. And he had managed the MENA region. So General Motors has offices in the Middle East. They're headquartered in Dubai. And he had kind of, the reason why he was tapped to be the executive champion was because he used to oversee that office a couple years ago. And so he had kind of vested interest in the region. He had like kind of the cultural know-how. He wasn't an individual with MENA background. He was like kind of like a regular American but he was very kind of invested in the community. And
again, what's his name? Because just in case I have a problem with my Cadillac, I can call him up. Just kidding.
No, he's great. But it was a great time. It was a great kind of transition moment, because it felt like there was new life kind of breathed into the organization. And what happened was, I was kind of on the leadership team for this employee resource group. And I want to say this was May of 2023 at this point. And we had sat down with our executive champion, and he was like, from a candid perspective, what exactly is it what are the like the aspirational things that your organization would want in this in GM to really feel like real satisfaction and real like pride in where you work. And there were two things that were on the top of that list. The first one was MENA kind of demographic representation. which means when you apply for a job or you want to move around within the company, when you list your demographic, MENA people have to list as white because it's,
Yeah.
so like being able to have another checkbox for like Middle East, North African, because
That's like a classic poll everywhere you
classic.
You're either other or like Asian Pacific Islander.
Right. Exactly. So that was like a really high item. I'd probably say it was number one. And number two was our Muslim employees have been banging on this door for probably 20 years about we need to have one Sharia compliant option, just one. Because we have so many folks that are not that are not opting into any retirement options at GM. And when he heard that, I mean, I think it helps that this individual was also someone who was like passionate about personal finance. And he's like, you're telling me that I have individuals in my employee resource group that are missing out on the 4% match because we as a company failed to give them an option. And it was like a spark. Like for that, it was like, okay, we're gonna, we'll essentially do what we can to see how this will happen. And that's when really the work started. So what I did, being sweet, alhamdulillah, was amazing. What I'd done was I'd sat down with a couple core individuals who were really passionate about this issue. And we put together like a one pager. We were like, we wanted to dumb this issue down for, wherever it would go, just essentially explaining what is Sharia compliance? What does it mean for funds to be, like, it was literally just one page. It had to be extremely simple. And it was just like, what is the problem at hand? What is the current offering that the General Motors retirement portal has? And what is the gap? Like where is the gap right now? It's like, okay, well, this is where you are right now. This is where we need to be. This is where the gap is. And then we also gave a recommendation. We said, these are 5 or 6 funds that are reputable. They have a legacy, like Halal fund, like Amana. And we said, choose any of these. Not only are they good options, Fidelity offers them today.
Yeah.
They're offered within Fidelity's portal today. And so a lot of these folks, they're opting in for these funds in their personal Roth IRAs, for example, but they miss out on the matching. So that was literally just like put together a nice one pager, essentially explaining this concept to people that are not familiar with the background or even financially savvy, and just dumbed it down really, really simple. And maybe dumb's the wrong word, but just explained it really, really clearly. Because at the end of the day, you're storytelling and you're communicating that the whole purpose of an employee resource group is to advocate for issues like this. And this is like a very clear kind of failure to meet the needs. So put the one pager together. That was kind of like the work that we did. The work that our executive champion at the time, the head of Cadillac, he was able to get us into the room pretty much. That was like the big like aha moment, was that like we were passionate about the issue. We were able to effectively communicate the problem and very clearly kind of illustrate what the problem was at hand. But we didn't really have a place in the room with someone that was sitting next to us that had our community's kind of interests at hand. And so, he had made this issue a personal issue. He said, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that this is something that you get in front of the right people to make this happen. And we'll ensure that it goes through in whatever way we can. And if it doesn't, we're going to really understand why. I'm going to need a great answer as to why this can't happen.
So basically he was kind of like, because he was senior enough to be able to open the door and let you meet with people that were actually making the decisions, right? That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, and I think that was a good learning experience for me as like a young engineer of like the type of politics that happen at like big corporations is that you can kind of be empowered and you can be passionate about something. And the unfortunate reality is like the decision making kind of lies within a small group of individuals. And that's just the nature of it. I think maybe you need to have a small group of decision makers, but like you really need to tap at least one person in that group or whoever is in that decision-making pool to really opt into making your issue a personal issue. And they really champion it. I mean, the executive champion, right? It's in the word. So that was really like the spark. And then, so I would like to say that that's what it all ended. But of course, with any journey, when there's hiccups, there's bumps. That was May of 2023. So we got into the room, and the people that were represented in this room where we had presented it was essentially, so it was our executive champion, it was the folks that represented the employees, myself included, and then it was individuals from like the HR kind of employee benefits group, and they were the face of a lot of other folks that were kind of responsible for this decision. So not everybody was in the room. Like Fidelity wasn't in the room. We didn't have like the people that were physically choosing the funds in the room, but it was more so like the front office of the HR benefits team was there. Well, it was not just them. It was their vice president, because it was like the equivalent of our VP.
Okay.
the decision in the room was that they said, we're going to make this happen. We're going to make it happen. We're going to try our best to offer with whatever way, in wherever way we'll be able to kind of find a feasibility, path. But we really want to make sure that if this is really like high kind of priority for you guys, we're going to try our best to at least have one option. And that was really like, it was amazing to hear that, because that was the first.
Yeah. Why do you think it happened so why do you think it happened so quickly like that? Is it just because of the fact that you were sitting in the right room?
I think it was the nature of the way that we presented the message. I think we had just excellent communication in terms of like what the problem was at hand and what needed to change, versus us just kind of raising a flag. Like, we had done the research, and I think doing the research was important.
That's important.
And we also had the head of global Cadillac sitting to the left of me, and so naturally, if he's gonna say like, you need to tell me why we can't do this, if you're saying we can't do this because this is a big priority for my community. I think that kind of double whammy was enough to kind of get us over the edge, just to get buy off. And so the decision was, we're going to pursue this path. We're going to at least do the diligence to see what it would take. And, we'll have an answer. At that time, they had said, our goal is that by, benefits enrollment period, which is February of the new year not enrollment is right before the new year. Sorry, like November-ish of 2023. So essentially ready for the 2024 benefits year, we would have a Sharia compliant option. That was the objective. So like maybe like a 7-ish month turnaround, 6 months turnaround.
That's a pretty quick turnaround, to be honest with you.
Pretty quick, pretty ambitious, I would say. It didn't happen, unfortunately, not at that time. And there was some local issues, of course. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with like what was happening, but on the automotive industry, I think it's every 5 years. It's every 4 years. There's a UAW, which is the
contract
unions. Yes, contract. So in 2023, September of 2023, the UAW goes on strike. And so, all of our factories shut down. All of our, the company is essentially, when the UAW goes on strike, it's essentially like a ticking time bomb, because I'm not saying, not in a bad way. I mean, of course, I'm not here to comment on whether the union was right or wrong, but from the company's perspective, every day that we're not selling cars, we're bleeding money. Like, that CapEx is astronomical.
True.
And they had a targeted strike as well, which was extremely intelligent, because they didn't just have a general strike where they closed down all the factories. They had said, okay, we're going to close down these 2 or 3. I think they started with truck plants, which are like, they started with a mid-sized truck plant, which in the world of automotive is a fairly high revenue vehicle, but they did not shut down the plant like in Arlington or in Flint, which were like full-size truck plants, which was where the company makes the real money. And they were like, if we don't have an agreement by a certain date, these 3 plants are going to be on. Yeah. So anyway, that's just nerding out a little bit about the dynamics.
That's right. But just out of curiosity though, like, did it ever come, maybe was this something did you guys ever thought about and said, hey, why don't we just approach the union and ask the union to help us to be able to negotiate into the benefits part of it? Was that ever a conversation that you had, or amongst yourselves, I mean?
Yeah. The union's actually like a completely different entity. So I think we were white collar kind of employees in the engineers and finance folks and purchasers. At least this was like within the like, we were salaried employees. I should probably say that. And the union did not represent, like, from my understanding, we didn't represent the salaried employees at all. More so the folks that were in the factory. So it actually is a completely different negotiation.
Sure, completely different.
When the union negotiates days off, though, it also kind of impacts us though. So actually, when they negotiated to have Indigenous Peoples Day, and we got it off as well. So there's some overlap, but not too much.
Okay. All right.
But I gave you all the details about I gave you all the details about the union, because this was obviously like a huge kind of wrench in the plan of anyone in the HR organization, because they would get a proposal from they would get a proposal from the union about like, this is the package that we have. This is what we want for compensation. This is like what we want our bonuses and our rates to be. And then like, essentially the HR representatives would have to like run a bunch of financial models and see like, is this feasible or not? So I'm only illustrating this because it's an extremely like time intensive and headcount intensive exercise to go through a union negotiation. And we were the people that were responsible for getting our Sharia compliant 401k across the finish line were the same people that were negotiating with the union, running those financial models. So naturally, it's not going to be the number one priority, of course. I mean, in a multi-billion-dollar kind of business, which is understandable. So, December came around and we were slowly becoming late. And so, we'd gotten back into a room and we said, can we get an update? well, we were supposed to have you were supposed to have something by now, and they had said there's just absolutely no way we're going to be able to do this because we're dealing with union negotiations, so we're going to have to punt it to later next year probably. And I think they gave us an interim of like 6 months. They said in the summer of 2024 is probably when we'll have something. At this time, I had found out I had gotten into HBS, and so I was going to leave GM in the summer of 2024.
Yeah,
So I was
yeah.
kind of upset because I really wanted to see it kind of happen while I was there. My goal was to just get it implemented, whether or not I was there. And so, but the smart thing was that like the executive champion that we had kind of made sure that we were meeting monthly at this point with the team. Because okay, like we slipped, we understand there's some macro issues at hand, economic issues that are affecting our industry, but let's try not to make this slip anymore. So we would have monthly meetings with this team really through July. And it slowly became clear to us that like they were having intense conversations with Fidelity about like what exactly to offer. So they would kept coming. So just to give some context, we recommended the MENA fund. We recommended MENA and MENA growth as like the number one like ideal option because they were the most reputable. They also performed very well. I mean, relative to like the S&P, just very high performing funds. I'm personally invested in MENA as well. Like outside of GM, I was following it, and so I was familiar. Yeah. And the folks that were involved in this, we just know that if you want a Sharia compliant option, a MENA fund it's really like your go-to. So the conversation converged on MENA with the HR benefits folks, and they were like asking us about this and like the history of the fund, and so we directed them to the Saturna Capital.
Yeah, it's really funny they start asking you and you're not even an expert.
Yeah, like I'm just an investor. I mean, I personally do, but we knew that they were Sharia compliant and that it was a great option, and so of course they were kind of the ones that were going to do the diligence, not really us. And what ended up happening was, the diligence continued. The summer comes along, and they're saying, we still need some more time. Fine, whatever. What it was, internal politics, things happen. The end of that year, I would say about November of 2024. At this point, by this time I had already moved on to HBS. They'd kind of pulled everybody into a meeting. I wasn't there because I wasn't at the company anymore, but I was aware of the conversation through the folks that were there. They briefed me after, and they had said, okay, we found the path that we're going to do this. We're not going to be able to like add a 28th option, which is literally like a MENA GX or something. What we're going to do is we've negotiated with Fidelity to offer brokerage link, which is essentially where you can just choose any fund on Fidelity, and it can just be a total. And so the reason why they were hesitant to do that was because they said, well, maybe if there's a lack of sophistication or something where you're not really able to choose the right options for yourself, or maybe you're investing into something that's actually not really great for a retirement option. They didn't want to put employees in any position, and it's rightfully so. They want to put employees in any position where they would be investing their hard-earned kind of salary dollars, and then their retirement funds were just underperforming or not doing well at all.
Which is funny because you can totally blow up your portfolio in a brokerage account more than you can in a fund. So, but and it is what it is.
Yeah, I truly, I mean, I don't know, but that was So that was kind of the answer.
Kind of
And
like,
so
it was like a compromise, if you want to call it.
yeah, and honestly, it was fine because at the end of the day, we wanted some way to be able to opt into that without any fees or any sort of like extra hurdles. There was one slight hurdle where you actually had to transfer
Manually
the funds
move
into
over
a
money.
brokerage link,
Yeah.
and then once it was all in brokerage link, you could then kind of invest it in whichever way you see fit. And actually, I think this is a net benefit for the company because whether you're interested in Sharia compliant funds or not, if you're savvy at all in terms of investing, you can kind of personally choose what you want. You can make your own personal blend. But of course, the Muslim employees were like ecstatic over this because Fidelity has such a wide breadth of funds that they are, offering on their platform, including a lot of Sharia compliant options.
As you're having these monthly meetings, right? And you were talking to them about, hey, if you want an option, Amana would be a good option. What are some of the objections that you were hearing about along the way? Was it about,
Yeah.
Like I've heard objections like, oh, if we allow it for Muslims, we have to allow it for all the religious organizations. I've heard that before. I've also heard the objection of, oh, if you allow employees to choose what the funds that they want in, then it's going to be almost like a democracy where you're not choosing based on the best product. You're choosing based on the vote of who likes what. So were those some of those objections, and what other ones did you face?
That sounds like you were in the room because those were the main objections. Where it was, yeah, I think the beautiful thing is I think if you talk to other people that have gone through this process, the stories are so similar.
Yeah.
And, throughout this process.
And that's the one, that's what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I've heard this from other people, and that's why I'm mentioning to you. So,
No, exactly. And the automotive community in Detroit is tiny, right? So like once we had gotten that initial green light in May of 2023, like we had kind of mentioned on like the professional Muslims group along the other major car companies like Ford and Stellantis. I think at that time they were Fiat Chrysler. But we had mentioned to them that like, oh, like this is something that it looks like is going to go through. They were like, this was like a huge deal for them because they're like, GM is going to do it. We've been trying for years. And it was a big catalyst because if GM does something, they're like an industry standard. It totally moves the needle for the industry to be able to adopt that. So everyone was really interested in benchmarking what we were doing, why I was really happy to come on this podcast, because I always get questions from other folks that are at the other OEMs, so the big car companies or the suppliers like the Bosches. They were like, what exactly did it take? And so to outline kind of like how those conversations went, it was a really grueling process. And honestly, there was a lot of like, we had to be really kind of diligent on nagging them. So like we'd have a meeting. It wasn't, our executive champion would of course not always be in these meetings because, he's running Cadillac. Just a small little company, right?
He's answering my phone calls about my problem with my Cadillac.
Hopefully not many problems, but yeah, so we were kind of representing, I guess, ourselves. And the way it would go is we say, can you just outline some of the progress that's happened over the past, month on moving this? And they say, like the ball hasn't moved very much. Like these are the meetings that we've set up with Fidelity. These are the concerns that like our internal HR team has. And some of the concerns, like as you said, the big one was like, are we going to set a precedent that if we create one specific fund because of the Sharia compliant reason, like what's stopping us from creating a fund anytime anyone causes a reason? Because it creates a precedent of us saying like, well, why is it okay for this group and not for this group? And also like, if I look at the 27 options, like it's a pretty big blend of like, you've got like I said, the established funds like the S&Ps, you've got the social indexes of the world funds, and then you have a bunch of like target retirement date ones like 2045, 2050. And so to have like a random like a MENA there, they were saying like they weren't entirely sure if that would really be the best option. So I don't know if this would have been faster if it were a smaller company, but like just from my understanding of working at a larger kind of behemoth of an organization, decisions in general take a long time. But once the decision is made, from my experience, once the decision is made, if you have enough of buy-off from like senior leadership, things move really quickly. So I think that like the buy-off from leadership was enough to get the issue moving, but like every now and then you need a little bit of elbow grease to push it along. So sometimes like we'd have 2 or 3 meetings, and this is something I would advise anyone that wants to go through this process. We'd have 2 or 3 of these meetings, like if they're happening monthly, 2 or 3 months, where really nothing has moved, and we're afraid we're going to slip again. And this is actually what happened. Like say it's March or April of 2024. They say they're going to be ready by the summer. Really, we don't have any confidence of that happening. There's no strike going on. Like there's no humongous issue. Of course, I'm sure they're busy, but so we talk to our executive champion and we say this is what's happening. We don't think the issue is moving. Can we get a little bit of help here? And then they'll fire off an email and they'll say, we're a little bit concerned. Can you like outline to me a little bit of what the issues are? And of course, like that ruffled feathers in the wrong way. Definitely.
Sure.
Like it's uncomfortable to do that. But like, because I'm at the working level and I've got working level counterparts and I have a lot of respect for them and we work together. But any time that something really stalls and something you're really passionate about and you kind of go and you like tell dad and you're like, hey, like this isn't working. Can you go tell them to get their stuff together?
Yeah.
And then that makes its way down to your counterpart on the other side of the working level. That really makes the dynamic for you two a little bit tougher now, because it's like, okay, well, all right, you're just gonna call dad when things don't go well. Like, so it created a dynamic that was a little bit more tense for sure. I don't think they're a huge fan of me by the end of it because I was very persistent.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I think that like that persistence was needed because I really didn't want us to get to the point where we were like 70, 80% of the way and it would just drop. Because I think if it dropped, it would never be picked up again. Like this was our best chance. And I knew that if like a company as like a Fortune 100 company like General Motors was able to offer a Sharia compliant option, whether it be through a 28th option or it being a brokerage link kind of bridgeway to the rest of the Fidelity portfolio, it would absolutely be a catalyst for the rest of the industry to at least say, hey, we have an example of someone who's doing this, so we can follow through. Because there's a lot of in the automotive industry, there's a lot of fast followers.
So what other objections were you getting? Just that
Yeah,
we can
beyond the
document a little bit about maybe other people get the same similar objections.
no, great. I mean, beyond the one where it's like, oh, should we have everybody? Would we have everyone like, kind of opt in for their own? Another one was more so like, fund like performance. Like that was a huge one where they were saying that like these are what we have on here right now are established funds that we've spent years diligencing. And actually, there was a set time horizon where they said, and this was something that I think was going to kill it for sure, where they had said, when we start to evaluate whether or not we're going to add a fund, we look at like a 5-year time horizon, and we start our diligence and we say like, what has been the fund's performance aggregated over 5 years?
Yeah.
And if it's something that meets a certain threshold, I don't know what the exact threshold was, then it would be considered or added, or it wouldn't be. And that was more so just to ensure that those funds were performing well and up to the expectations of, if you have an option that's available to 60,000 employees, they wanted to do some diligence. And actually, funny enough, when we got the information from the Ford employees, they had done the same thing. They had gotten the rejection with this exact, I have the letter actually still to this day. They had gotten a rejection for this exact reason, where they had said their benefits kind of counterpart had said like, there's the reason why we can't add a fund right now is because we have a time horizon in which we evaluate each fund that we're going to bring on and we do diligence on it. And this just doesn't meet the requirements based off of that time horizon.
Okay.
And that really just killed the deal for them immediately. I mean, for us, it was more so like what overcame that. I think like part of it was like us kind of compromising and them compromising. Like they'd say, okay, well, you just want to be able to have the option. And if we communicate to our employees and we say, if we offer you this bridge, you are fully responsible for any funds that you opt in for because this is your retirement account.
Yeah.
And we said that that's something that our community is okay with because at the moment we are zero. We don't have anybody, so it's better than zero.
So they offered the brokerage option. You didn't offer to them, right?
No. Yeah. It was and they had kind of pitched it to us just to feel the waters. And they said like how does this have to manifest? If it's manifested through you being able to pick an option, is that fine? And we said sure. And I don't know the background. I don't know if there were other groups that were also tagging them at the same time for other reasons, and maybe this is just like a blanket kind of solution. But from my understanding and the timing of how things happened, it was the push for a Sharia-compliant fund, which allowed General Motors to switch to Brokerage Link for Fidelity. That's my observation.
That's awesome. Now pretty much now all employees at GM across General Motors across the whole company are able to open up a 401k account, get the brokerage, and then from there invest in whatever they want. It doesn't have to be Sharif Flint. Give me any fund that they want that Fidelity has.
Exactly. And I don't know why that's not something that was opted in earlier, other than maybe the communication of you invest at your own risk. I don't know if there's extra funds or like fees that are associated with brokerage. I mean, truly
one of the major objections though was fees and liability, right? Those are the two things that would stop everything. So I think one of them is fees, because I think for a lot of different ones that I've come across, maybe not GM, is that once you put the money into the 401, the brokerage, when you buy a fund, there's actually a fee associated with that fund. So I don't know, some have that, some don't. That's one thing. But the other one, which is the the other one was just, it's a headache, right? I mean, obviously Fidelity would have to do more than to do that. And there's a liability. Like if I go in there and I blow up my portfolio and I don't make any money or lose all my money, then is there a possibility that the employee will go back to GM and say, hey, why'd you allow me this opportunity? I should have known you couldn't trust me, or whatever it is if people use an excuse for. But I think those are the ones that I've heard. Those are the ones that I've heard that actually are the biggest obstacles to getting even a brokerage fund or a brokerage account in there.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious, have you heard of any other like companies of this size that have opted?
So there's 500 Fortune, they're obviously Fortune 500, right? So when we did our research, we found about 250 or so, but half of companies actually do allow a brokerage option. Okay. Now that's a little bit I'll make a disclaimer. Not everybody allows 100%. Okay. Yeah, some people are 25%, some people 50. This depends on, I don't know what their formula is, but not everybody allows 100%. But like about half of the Fortune 500 companies do allow a brokerage option. And I'll tell you, a lot of them were done by people like you. I mean, really kind of from a Muslim perspective, going in there, talking to their groups, and talking to their employee resource group, and then kind of taking it up the ladder and those type of things. And really, for you, all it takes is like one person to stir the pot, right? And just keep pushing it, keep pushing it. And eventually, you either come across the right person
Yeah.
For some person will join your group that's high enough to do it. All of those things will begin to happen. I remember at one company, the Muslim resource group got together with the environmental resource group that got together with the Christian resource group. Kind of they all came together and said, what could we do to get this happen? And then they had the brokerage option was the best one for all of them as a compromise. So they ended up doing it over there as well. And then the last one is what you mentioned also. If you have a competitor of yours that's actually doing it, they definitely, everybody else wants to jump on board because it's all about competitive salary and competitive benefits and those type of things. So definitely, the fact that GM got it, I think probably caused other people. Now I do remember, and I think that at that time, because I had a cousin who worked there, Fiat Chrysler did offer a brokerage account. Did you guys know that? Did you kind of push that?
I wasn't aware of one. Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't know if they had offered a brokerage account, but we were honestly much closer with the Ford kind of process because it was kind of the constant comparison.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good thing where like in your community outside of work, I mean, have these discussions about, hey, I'm doing this with the 401k. What do you guys offer? What can we do together or kind of approach it that way and that type of thing. So, I mean, I don't think Ford's there yet, but definitely their eyeyebrows are raised
trying.
because the fact that GM is.
Yeah, it definitely stirred a lot of a lot of flames in the pot for them. I will say my biggest kind of reflection of this whole process was really one thing, and the reason why I think I really wanted to kind of like go and try and do the MBA and see what I could kind of do was honestly like I'm very happy that it ended up the way that it did. I see this as a win because at the end of the day, any new employees there is an option for them to kind of purify their retirement options, but it took us to essentially beg and plead with a senior executive who happened to be passionate about an issue that was important to us and this is something that we can't compromise on. Like this is our religion. It's it's extremely important. It's not something that's like a nice to have. And so for me, it was like, for our communities to really move the needle on like having, a seat at the table, it's going to take a lot more than us just, making allies with individuals that are really kind of in these decision-making capacities. I want to have a seat at the table. Like, I don't want to have.
Meaning that you have to be that person or Muslim.
You have to be that person.
That's right.
You have to go and, make yourself an influential individual at the company and then say, you know what, we're going to make sure that we have options for all of our employees, regardless of their religious faith. And I think that's like, for me, it was kind of like an eye-opening experience of, wow, like, you have to get in there. Like you have to get in there one way or another.
That's true. But listen, Malek, I really appreciate your time. I think I learned a lot as well, just from kind of not only recollecting on what I've done with other people at different companies, but also new ideas of being able to to how to get that brokerage option or even just the halal option within the 401k. I will say, for every dollar that somebody puts in there, I hope you will get the reward for it because I know you tirelessly kind of worked for a few years to be able to do it. Probably didn't see the benefit of it because you left before you were able to do that. But you never know. It might be something where maybe you go back to GM or because of GM somebody else did it and that's who you end up working for. So the benefits. This is like it's a spillover benefit that happens across the industry, across industries, I should say, because the 401k is something that every company has. So I really appreciate not only you doing that for the Muslim community, but also taking the time to be able to share with us. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Monem. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Halal Money Matters. If you like what you hear, please do rate us on the app stores and also leave us a review. It helps other people find us a lot easier.
The thoughts and opinions expressed on Halal Money Matters do not necessarily reflect the views of Saturna Capital, MENA Mutual Funds, or their affiliates. This podcast is prepared based on information Saturna Capital deems reliable. However, Saturna Capital does not warrant the accuracy or completeness of the information. We do not provide tax, accounting, or legal advice to our clients, and all investors are advised to consult with their tax, accounting, or legal advisors regarding any potential investment. Investors should not assume that investments in the securities and/or sectors described were or will be profitable. Investors should consult with a financial advisor prior to making an investment decision. The views and information discussed in this commentary are at a specific point in time, are subject to change, and may not reflect the views of the firm as a whole. All material presented in this publication, unless specifically indicated otherwise, is under copyright to Saturna. No part of this publication may be altered in any way, copied, or distributed without the prior express written permission of Saturna Capital. Performance data quoted herein represents past performance and is no guarantee of future results. Investment return and principal value of an investment will fluctuate so that an investor's shares, when redeemed, may be worth more or less than their original cost. Current performance may be significantly higher or lower than data quoted herein. Performance current to the most recent month end can be obtained by visiting www.amanafunds.com or by calling toll-free 1-800-728-8762. Please consider an investment's objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. To obtain this and other important information, which you should carefully consider before investing, about the Amana funds in a free prospectus or summary prospectus, please visit www.amanafunds.com or call 1-800-728-8762. The Amana funds limit the securities they purchase to those consistent with Islamic principles. This limits opportunities and may affect performance. The Amana funds are distributed by Saturna Brokerage Services, member FINRA/SIPC, and a wholly owned subsidiary of Saturna Capital, investment advisor to the Amana funds. Securities mentioned in this podcast episode. The Amana funds do not hold any securities mentioned in this episode.